now have a quorum. Oh, good, Linda.
And I see
Linda
the
beat me
recording.
to it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our September 9th, 2021 ad hoc committee on affordable housing and workforce housing virtual meeting. First, I'd like to call to order and then just do a roll call. If you could just say your name. I'm Sam Bruder. So that way Jennifer can take attendance.
Sarah O'Coursey.
Terry Berthelot.
Thank you. And we got Charlie here as well. Okay, and for next agenda item, we have approval of minutes. Terry moves and I'll second. All in favor, raise your hand. Great. 3. I'm sorry, you were muted.
I believe I have to abstain because I don't believe I was at the last meeting.
Perfect. We have 3 yeses and 1 abstention. Okay. And Jennifer, was there any buddy from the public who wanted to comment?
We did not get any requests for public comment.
Thank you. And that leads us to new business. So we have our affordable housing in Mansfield next steps, and you'll see on the agenda that the housing plan has been linked. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of go through and combine this also with the next agenda item, which talks about our charge that we were given. And that's, if you look at the charge from December 3rd from the town council, November 12th, 2019 meeting, we've developed the affordable housing plan for Mansfield, which has satisfied the Connecticut general statute law that said that we needed to do that. And it'll be an update to the goals and strategies identified in Chapter 7 of the Mansfield Plan of Conservation and Development. We need to still review materials and research on the creation, use, and management of housing trust funds. We have identified potential sources of funding. We have identified provisions for the use and distribution of funds. We still have to identify provisions for the management of the housing trust fund. And then when we do so, we need to develop a draft ordinance developing the housing trust fund for the town council's consideration. Councilor Berthelot.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, looking at these strategies, if you laid them out, whether they're sort of, I think, misordered. It seems like strategy 1.2, the provide adequate staffing and skill sets to administer affordable housing, and the training to staff, that those are sort of key in terms of then them being in a position to make the appropriate recommendations going forward. I haven't any sense in terms of our in-house expertise in these areas, and whether or not folks, I mean, this seems like a whole new sort of set of job responsibilities. So I just think that's important to throw out there before we sort of nail down our next strategy. It seems like we should have in-house experts who could point us in the right directions.
Yeah, that's very valid. I mean, Jennifer, I know that we're going to be discussing this, but in terms of what you know right now, you know what staffing would be available? I'm imagining it might be you, imagining it might be, go ahead.
Well, I think I think it really, the staffing level depends on how many units, if we are acquiring affordable housing. I think the way I was sort of reading this is that having you can establish a committee, right? And then you can also establish a general ordinance for establishing a trust fund. Those are pretty general things that other towns have done. The ordinance is pretty broad. And then, outlined in the plan are some suggestions, although the housing committee, with approval from the town council and planning and zoning commission, will have to prioritize the housing trust expenditures, but that's sort of step 2. So it seems to me your next steps would be to determine if you want to establish a separate housing committee, and then also concurrently see if you would like to move forward with a housing trust fund ordinance. So that, and then perhaps you could, when you establish that ordinance, you could have guidelines that you're referring to that would prioritize the housing trust fund expenditures. Then once you're getting into the expenditures and implementing and qualifying and managing those funds, working with a developer, I do believe that's when you would need the expertise. Linda, you can chime in if you're there and if you feel differently or have anything else to add.
No, I think generally identified that. A lot of it in terms of what staffing you're going to need is really going to depend on the priorities and what projects you want to implement. So for example, if the trust fund is looking at the different examples, for example, doing down payment assistance for someone that's purchasing a home, do you want someone who has some underwriting skills? If we are looking at acquiring property and trying to do development, which I would say is kind of on the other extreme and probably further down the road, then you want somebody with, you may want somebody with real estate skills. I think right now, the staffing for this is probably going to come out of planning, Jennifer or myself. And, we'll be working with Ryan as the town manager through the budget process if we need additional assistance based on what's coming out in terms of the number of units that may be developed and the different types of initiatives that you want to prioritize. Because I can tell you from the CDBG program that we currently run, it takes a significant amount of effort to review applications and qualify applicants if we start looking, depending on what initiatives you're looking at. Is it more focused on people that are purchasing single family homes and providing assistance to them in exchange for some type of affordability restriction? Is it more focused on developments and saying, okay, if we get fees through this fund and a developer who wants to do an affordable housing project, it applies for assistance, how do we review that? And some of that expertise can quite frankly come from the committee as well that you appoint in terms of reviewing those types of applications.
So sometimes I get confused about who's making what decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel in any way like I have the capacity to make the decisions about, that I have the knowledge to make decisions about town capacity to handle any of these ideas, nor do I understand the logistics of putting these ideas into place. And what I'm feeling like so if our job now is simply to appoint a committee who will go on and take this stuff on, I'm not sure. I'm feeling like I'm wanting from you all some direction, that you're the ones with the expertise, and that rather than say, if you want to do it this way, you want to do it that way, that I would really like you to tell us and I mean, of course, ultimately we have to decide for ourselves, but I'm really anxious to hear sort of recommendations that are specific to the needs in our community, and also recognizing what's happening in town hall and what you're able to do.
I think that go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
I think right now we don't even have a place to collect money. So I think establishing a trust fund is an important thing to do, so that when we get funds, either through our fee in lieu, or if we're whatever mechanism we're going to use to collect the money, we need to establish an ordinance that establishes this fund. Then I think we need to have a committee. And then, and that committee should be prioritizing how those monies should be spent. Then based on, as Linda was saying, if it's more like a CDBG program and we need someone to do income qualifications or down payment assistance, or as she was, we'll have to get expertise at that point. But I'm not sure we need the staff expertise at this point to establish the trust fund ordinance. Because if you read what I put in your packet regarding Fairfield's ordinance, and the same one is used in Darien, it's a very general ordinance. And I think in terms of an ordinance to establish a fund, you want to keep it fairly broad. And then that committee would then work on guidelines. And we've already established some of the guidelines in the plan, which came from recommendations from the community, as well as our consultant who did have expertise in that. But every time we get an application, we're going to have to evaluate that. And I think the expertise comes in with the implementation of the expenditure of those funds. So
I'm just gonna throw this out there, and maybe I'm wrong, but do we need to start another committee, or is our charge in the situation where we could just continue on?
Our charge is really just to set that committee up. We have to identify these, revenue sources, which we've done. We have to identify, or hold on, I want to pull it up again, so that way I'm not just, not only do we come up with the potential sources, but then the provisions of identify ways that it can be used and distributed. And I think that with our housing plan, we've really given a wide range of what the town will be supportive of, because we have a lot of support in town for affordable housing. And I think that residents just want to see something, and I'm not saying that anything will be good enough. I just think that, I haven't heard anyone arguing with me about the need for affordable housing in Mansfield. And so our main focus, I think, should be on this housing fund ordinance that can be, sent up to the town council for a recommendation, and also the composition of the committee, who will then be using the framework, which is very wide. It has a lot of options, but they will use that framework to identify the sources that they would like for funding, and then how they would like to see those implemented. I know that there's been people who have discussed, increasing the mill rate specifically for this purpose. There's been discussion of getting rid of the in lieu of fee. So again, these are things that I would imagine that the committee, knowing what our appetite is, would then take those and make the recommendations back to the town council itself for planning and zoning, pursuant to whatever their authority is.
Okay,
So the biggest thing that we have in front of us is the committee composition and the ordinance draft. And so if and sticking with what we have in front of us with the agenda, in talking about the Affordable and Workforce Housing Committee, I'm viewing that more as the, making the recommendation to us developing a plan for what that committee should be. Do we want it to have, I'm going to use extreme numbers, but 50 members or 2? Do we want to have, people identified with specific backgrounds, and that sort of deal. So I think what so let's start with, because that's, so let me go with this. Does anybody have any questions as to where we're at right now in the process? Okay. And so what I'd like to do then, move on to this housing committee and figure out, you know, we have the example that's been provided by Jennifer for Fairfield. Has everyone had a chance to look at that, and do they have any input as to whether or not they think something similar would work in Mansfield, or do they think, you know, I'll go ahead and listen rather than keep asking questions.
I think there's a couple things going on. Just I think you've got your committee charge, and then you have this plan that you all adopted, the council and the Planning and Zoning Commission had adopted. So there's sort of these parallel tracks. So it's almost like, I don't know that you have, so the first two goals in that plan are the housing trust and the committee, and then also within the ad hoc committee's charge. So I guess what you're saying is that this ad hoc committee can decide whether or not to establish another committee and then move on with the trust, and then kind of hand over the reins to a separate committee if that's what you choose to do. Is that?
So the committee that, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think what you would be doing is making a recommendation to the town council, because the town council is the one that establishes committees. The other thing that I'm going to throw out there, and Jen and I just found this late today, we were looking in the Code of Ordinances for something, and we happened to find from 1989, Jennifer, a local housing partnership that was established under a statute that was adopted by the state in 1988. And we need to do some more research on that. I have never seen anything on this. There are some essentially incentives in the statutory language for that partnership, but it does spell out who members would be. One of the things I will say, that the one conflict between that and what we had discussed at a staff level was a concern about having Planning and Zoning Commission members on an advisory committee, because typically if there's any major project coming before them, they have a regulatory responsibility with regard to those projects. So that's something we would have to consider in terms of any committee. And I know that in the past, the town attorney, when it came to the Water System Advisory Committee, specifically said, no, they cannot have a representative on that committee because the projects that committee is reviewing is coming before them.
I like the language in this very much. I think 7 is the right number to work with. And it makes sense that our role would be to change the language in this. Well, staff would change the language in this to be appropriate for Mansfield, and then we could make a recommendation to the town council to create the committee.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Jennifer, if you could, for the next meeting, have something like that, that'd be great.
Do you want to make a formal motion to that effect, that you move to have staff to recommend that staff, or is it just a recommendation?
I think I would say just a recommendation, and then if the committee likes the ordinance language that's proposed, then at the next meeting you could do a formal action.
Yeah. So
Carla?
Go
ahead.
We'll update that and have you review it at your October meeting.
Thank you.
Hey, Jennifer, how did that get sent in? Is it in the agenda center?
That is in the packet that you were emailed, the links to the packet, or if you go on the agenda center, if you click on the link above, it says link to the packet. You can, it says the packet for this meeting is available at, and then click on that link.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to figure out what it's under. Is it-
I just sent you the link directly to your email.
Is it housing code? Okay, let me just see what I got here.
Yeah, that might be easier.
The name of the attachment is Town of Fairfield Affordable Housing Committee Ordinance, and it's under 4B.
Six. 4B.
Did the link work, Charlie?
Well, I got the link into where it is, but now I've got to pick which one it is.
It should be the,
Just go down the agenda.
yeah, it should be the second one, if you want to do it as a PDF.
Under new business, it's under B. And it's the second attachment under that agenda item.
Well, the link doesn't show any letter designation, but I did get the PDF and it does show. Click to open full PDF.
Yeah, there you go. And so now if you look
In
at,
that,
now if you look at 4B, now that you've opened up the full PDF, it should be the Town of Fairfield Affordable Housing Committee Ordinance.
oh yeah, I got it.
Perfect. And so what we've proposed is having Jennifer or any other staff member take the language and adjust it so that it is relevant to Mansfield. Obviously, we don't have a board of selectmen.
Right, and just change some of the language so we're not plagiarizing, right?
Yeah,
I think it's fine. It's all public domain. So we can cut and paste and replace Board of Selectmen with Town Council.
Well, I'd like
Is there anything in that you would like to kind of tie back to the affordable housing plan? So actually adding a reference to the town's affordable housing plan as updated, so that committee is referring back to that.
I think in the portion where the Affordable Housing Committee may, it's talking about make recommendations. I think those should be based on what was, with the community surveys and everything else being contained in the plan. I think that should be referenced in this in some way.
Okay.
Also, while you're doing this, Linda, just briefly, I'm kind of going through this, scanning it, and there are some specific references to places in town in Fairfield. So we obviously want to make sure we don't repeat that language.
Well, we'll go through, Jen and I will work on this and come up with a draft for your review at your next meeting.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there. In any event, all right, let's just get out of this. Let's get back over to later. Yeah, I'd have to really scan the whole thing and go through it all and look at it up close.
No
I figured it out,
problem.
but it's nice to have a template.
We'll have the language for Mansfield that we'll be able to look at and adjust at our next meeting. But, for tonight, we at least wanted to give everyone, all members the ability to vote yes or no in this, going in this direction.
And the other thing we'll do as staff is we'll check in to see, or maybe the town council members have an opinion about this. Do we want to have an ordinance to establish this committee like we would for Economic Development Commission or Conservation Commission? Or would you like it to be like some of your many other committees, like the Parks and Natural Resources Committee, or
I think it should be like that rather than through an ordinance for the committee. I do think that there needs to be a housing trust ordinance itself.
Yeah. But just a regular, just like how you would do another committee, like
Committee on Committees.
Yep. Okay.
Jen, I don't want to take the conversation backwards. I was having to do a little multitasking at the beginning, and you may have already covered this, or it may not be necessary to cover now in any case. But I know when you and Linda and I were talking about all this recently, we talked about the idea had been tossed around, I think, in the early going about, or the question had been raised about the Mansfield Nonprofit Housing Development Corporation kind of serving in this role. And we kind of talked out why that would be a conflict of interest or why that wouldn't make sense. So I just didn't know if that hadn't already been discussed here for the record. I didn't know if that needed to be covered, but you guys might have already discussed that at the front end.
You didn't discuss it.
No, but I mean, that makes sense. That's why they haven't been, they don't have a seat, here. But that's not to say that, we certainly valued their input when they come, and I've certainly enjoyed, the resources they provided us.
Right. Yeah, certainly. I mean, given that they could be an applicant for potential funding resources for a project, it's evident on its face why that would be problematic. But just thinking a casual observer might be listening to this at some point or rewatching the meeting and thinking, wait a second, we already have this thing. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
Good
point, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, there have been questions as to, why we haven't done that. So I appreciate that. All right. Anything else on the committee that we'll be recommending? So if not, then the next agenda item would be to discuss what ordinance language we want to have for our own housing trust fund. And if you look at 4C, we have Fairfield's housing trust model ordinance for us to look at. If everyone wants to take another quick glance at it, I had gone through it before, and I thought that it had done pretty well in terms of just making it broad as we talked about, and even talking about the expenditures. Again, it's broad. And the way I envision this working is that the committee that we're creating would, using these guidelines of the ordinance, make recommendations for how the expenditures will be, and also what the what funding sources they would like to have. And that would be, go ahead.
So overall, this seems very generic and fine, and once we can plug our language into it. So my question is, so in it talks about the potentiality of receiving gifts, monies, donations. The model of a not-for-profit works better with that, doesn't it, than a town managing the money? Because then folks potentially, if they're donating to a not-for-profit, and when you're donating to the town, you don't get those same. It's not, you can't deduct it, or can you?
Should be able to. You should receive the same tax deduction capability. I know law varies state to state, but I know in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, any donation to a municipal government entity or a state government entity carried with it the same tax deduction value or benefits as a contribution to like a 501c3. So unless there's something uniquely different about Connecticut, I would think that would be the same.
And I think that's something we might be able to ask Human Services, because I know they have a lot of programs that are funded by donations, camperships, the
But are they
holiday
giving
programs.
people the benefit of,
Receipts,
are they actually, like when I donate to a Covenant Kitchen, I get a nice little form from them that, that I can write for my taxes.
We can check on that. I mean, that's a good point, and we can certainly check on that to make sure that does happen.
Because I think you are correct. If you want to encourage donations, people are going to want that to be tax deductible, so that's they're getting that benefit for it.
Yeah, I think the answer, Terry, is you should be getting that confirmation. If we're not doing that, then that's sort of a shortcoming or a procedural gap we need to fill. But town should be issuing those just as a nonprofit would.
Charlie?
I would posit, does the town of Mansfield want to be in the real estate business?
In what sense?
Well, I mean, do we want to get involved with, being in the housing trust and all those other things, the actual town of Mansfield, as opposed to, creating this other thing we've discussed?
Well, so the way I look at the housing trust fund is not that it will automatically be one that's a developer and that is, only building units of, apartments and things like that. The housing trust fund will just be the money that can be spent. And then the committee will prioritize, one of the discussions we've had is, exchanging, a loan or some kind of payment in exchange for a deed restriction on your housing so that it's only, affordable housing use. And, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, we've talked about that, you and I, in terms of being beneficial in terms stabilizing neighborhoods, and that then, that's this is going to be around for, I think the deed restriction for it to count has to be 60 years or 40 for the state of Connecticut. The deed restriction has to be some sort of decades.
Yeah, it's definitely 30 or 40. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I 40 is in my mind, but we can double check that.
Well, either way,
Yep.
that's another thing that this housing trust fund can pay for. It'll just depend on the committee that we establish and what their priorities and what money they have. If they don't have enough money to build units, then they may have to look at, other low-hanging fruit like this that can more easily be done with existing housing. I imagine there's going to be need to build more affordable units from the ground up. I don't think that that's the only way to get to what we need and what we're required to have statutorily. It's just that's what, we have one in place, we just don't have funding for it. Charlie?
Is this kind of a structure going to be strictly for multi-unit developments, or will this be in place for someone that perhaps wants to buy a house, but then, the house might need, extensive renovations before it's livable? I mean,
Right.
Where do we take this?
That's a very good place to take it. That right there, it does not need to be multi-family, multi-unit, type of development. It could be what you're saying where, they're buying an existing single family home and they want to put a deed restriction on it. And in exchange, we give them money for that. And they take the money and use it for renovations.
Well, no, I'll give you an example. For instance, you recently just said that, certainly we want to restabilize our neighborhoods, and certainly a lot of these houses may be put back in the market for families. And of course, that house or several houses in a certain area may have gone through the gamut of whatever students, and they're in a little rough shape and need a little work. And so is that something that we're going to be able to allow to help families to get into the house, because it may come across as either it's a foreclosure or the house just won't sell because it's in rough shape.
Yeah, I mean, it even take away the student part of it, that is very much within the plan that we passed and allowed for this committee that we'll be creating to decide and prioritize. Because again, I think that's why I wanted to include the charge and kind of have this reestablishment of where we're at in the process, because we as a ad hoc committee are set up to do a finite amount of things and then allow the work to be done by those who will be continuing to do it. And what it sounds like in terms of what we'll need for staffing and what we'll need for this and everything like that will really depend on the level of projects that are initiated by this committee. And given I don't think there's any money in the housing trust fund just yet, especially since it's not even created. they're gonna have to really figure out how to get money into it. And then, depending on what they can actually get, whether it be from building fees or, a mill rate or, in lieu of, fee in lieu of, or, the density enhancement, that'll depend on what they're actually able to do for projects. And what they're actually able to do for projects will then in turn dictate what we need from staffing.
Charlie, in the affordable housing plan that was adopted in the action plan that I included in the packet under new business item A, on page 15 of that action plan, there's a whole list of some tool or some ideas of how the housing trust fund could be spent. So that there's just a number of different ways that you can achieve this goal of getting more affordable housing in town. So, but that's going to be an ongoing process.
I think deed restrictions are very important.
Well, the deed restriction is the only way we're going to get our percentage to count through 830G. So they are important.
Yeah, I don't
I
think,
think I was just going to say that I think, what Charlie was mentioning, Jennifer and I had also talked about as a way that may help get families back into neighborhoods and owner occupancy, so that you have both rental and ownership opportunities for affordable housing, because I think that's important, to provide people with that ability to grow and to have that investment.
So back to the ordinance, if I could.
please.
So one worry I have is is under section 7-3B1, where it limits all expenditures from this fund to very specifically costs associated with the investigation, appraisal, acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, repairing, administration, fees and maintenance costs, blah, blah, blah. That's great. It keeps people honest, but it's worrisome to me because that means you absolutely can't spend it on anything else. And it's possible, though very unlikely, but it's within the realm of possibility that we may be super, super successful with this fund and that we may end up with too much money in it and wouldn't be able to spend it elsewhere. So I wonder if we need an out for programs that support the families in the affordable housing or something of that ilk, so that we've had other funds in town where money was put into them for a particular reason, and then it was difficult to get the money back out of it, and it was just adding up. It's unlikely that this problem would arise. I'm imagining just fantastic world, but it seems that fantastic world happened, that it would be nice to be able to spend the money to support the families as well.
So you're talking about like adding more money for Section 8?
I'm saying if this locks all of this money into development of affordable housing, and if we're just doing wonderfully and all of a sudden we're at 20% and the fund is just doing really, really well, and we keep putting more money in it, that would be wasteful. And the way this is written, you couldn't do anything else. That would only go for more affordable housing. So it seems like we wouldn't want to spend that money for something like economic development, because that would be inconsistent, but something like supporting the families in or the people in affordable housing would be consistent.
We can look at language there for sure.
I'd want it to be only, the only thing is given the fact that we're, I think 6.6%, I would want it to not kick in until we hit at least the 10%. I'm fine with building that in now, so we don't have to go through this ordinance process again, but I don't want to let, I don't know who's going to be on the committee, and I don't want to give them direction to support families in affordable housing through programs until we've gotten that 10%. Charlie.
No, Terry brings up some very, very good points, and it is an issue, and it could be something down the road. And but that also ties into what I was just saying before, that perhaps some of that money, depending on how we change the language, could go towards renovating someone who, a family that wants to get into a neighborhood that was once, once a family neighborhood, now predominantly a student neighborhood, and we want to get it back the other way. And, maybe some of that money could go towards that to help someone to revamp our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I like that.
I do too.
So
What I'm
I
hearing
think,
is over 10%, and then programs that would support families or neighborhood stabilization or renovation.
Community development, maybe. But again, community development in the sense of, and in the David Friedman sense of the word, where it's really about ensuring that the folks who are being helped by affordable housing are being helped.
so basically going to income eligible people for various programs, whether it's food assistance, additional housing rehab funds, things
Training,
of that
job
nature.
training, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
This is exciting. I know it's been a process. It's been a little bit confusing at times, and I really appreciate that, we've gotten both town council and planning and zoning together so that we can all talk about this at the same time. Do we have any more recommendations that, I'd like to have Jennifer or staff draft up the ordinance, given the feedback we just given, so that we can discuss that as well at our next meeting.
I think my only suggestion is, in addition to the expenditures, would be allowing some percentage to be used to support the program. So for example, that going back to that staffing question that Terry started with, because this may also be something where if it's not town staff, we talked about this, the housing authority does have staff capacity in, certain areas where we may contract with them to say, oh, can you help us do qualifications? Can you help us with this? So I think making sure the language is clear enough that we can use it to support the administrative costs of the program,
Right.
in addition to kind of the hard costs, is important.
It's a really good point. Yeah. Why add a whole nother staff member if we can contract it out to somebody that we know can do the work?
Let's see, the other things that you may want to consider are the things like items 7 and 8 on the ordinance, how you're considering applications, things like that. I can modify this ordinance. We can add the language in under, let's see.
Which page is that you're looking at?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at something else. I'm looking at the application.
I was gonna say, I think that is.
Sorry about that, yep.
I was like, there's only 2 pages
I
to the
got
ordinance.
ahead of myself.
And I think that'll be important, but I don't know if that was not within our charge. And
Yeah,
it's
I think that's the committee, yeah. Sorry, I was like, that's a really specific ordinance, yeah.
good to
Jen
include.
and I we just wanted to provide that to give you an example of where Fairfield has gone with this since they did the ordinance. The committee has created that application. They have funded projects. Jen actually had a conversation with the staff person in Fairfield to kind of review the how this has worked for them and the progress they've made. So we just wanted to make sure you had information to see kind of where this could go, since that's not really in your charge, and you'll be kind of delegating that to the committee itself.
Great. Anything else from anybody on that? Okay.
Well, Linda's the director of economic and community development who staffs this, who's in charge of this Affordable Housing Trust Fund, said he would be willing to attend your October meeting and talk with you if you have any questions. If you want to run anything by him, they've been doing this for a while now in Fairfield, if that appeals to you.
Oh,
That would be interesting.
anybody else have any objections? No, great.
Oh.
I think that'd be good.
I'd love to hear the feedback.
So maybe he could just kind of give a rundown of a little bit of the history of the program, how it's working, some things that we should be thinking about as we move forward with this and establishing the committee and the fund,
Yes, especially in terms of the administrative part of it, you know, the
Yeah.
nuts and bolts, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay. And the next thing on our agenda, I see, you know, is the communications, and I had asked for 5A to be included just so that, Charlie, was it something from before?
No, I just wanted to add on to this. I mean, with respect to the Fairfield thing, should we reach out to any other communities that may be similar in makeup to ours?
Well,
I-
Fairfield has universities in it.
They have
I
a
think one of
different
the,
different
Yeah,
model, but private universities, which are different.
Well, I'm-
which, yeah, and I think interestingly, you know, when Jen had the conversation with Mark, she came back and she's like, well, this is how they fund theirs, and it's a surcharge on their building permit fee. But they have two private universities that are doing huge buildings and they're getting
Yeah.
huge permit fees, so that the universities are basically kind of funding their affordable housing right now. I think one of the challenges is there are not a lot of communities in Connecticut that have a trust fund. So we know Fairfield and Darien do. My guess is that with this affordable housing plan requirement from the state, you may see some more that go this direction. There are some housing trusts which are different in that they're basically nonprofit organizations. So we have talked to some of them in the past, but it's kind of a more complex model. And I think when we talked to them previously, the thought was you need to kind of start with the trust fund to start growing. And in some cases, I want to say Burlington, Vermont, they started with a housing trust fund run by the city that eventually kind of morphed and transformed and was turned over to a wholly separate organization that was as a housing trust that handles all of that real estate and acquisition. But the trust fund itself, there aren't a lot of examples in Connecticut for towns that I would say are similar to ours. So that's why you have the Fairfield ordinance.
Well, the reason I said that is because I think Darien and Fairfield probably have a slightly different median income than we do.
Correct. And our income figures will be different in terms of who qualifies. So everything is based on the state definition of who qualifies for, and that is based on a comparison of state median income versus the area median income, and we fall into the Hartford, West Hartford metro area. So
the state has a housing trust fund program. Is there anybody there that could provide us guidance, expertise, or I don't know anything about it. I just know it exists.
We can chat with this. Well, one of the things I was going to do was talk to one of the folks at the Department of Housing and about the local housing partnership statute. So like I can add that to that and see if there's any information they can share on the housing trust. I know that the kind of programs I've seen the state applications for funding, they are very intense. And just the number of spreadsheets alone would make your head spin in terms of kind of the financing and other pieces. I think for us, it's probably, again, depending on how we're looking at using the money, hopefully we're leaning towards something a little bit simpler, but they're also doing millions
It's individuals
of
who
dollars.
apply. It's not the town that applies for their funds.
Yes. So for example, and I don't know if Eagleville Green is going through the trust fund, but they apply for competitive grant funds through the Department of Housing. And so I've seen some of those applications, and, given the amount of funds they're talking about, usually in the millions, they're looking for a lot of financial data, and presumably have the staff that have the capacity to review that.
Anything else? Okay, so just going back to the communications, 5A on our agenda. I had asked for Jennifer to include Mansfield zoning regulations as it relates to affordable housing. So that way, just for reference, this is where we're at. This is what we have. We will be asking the committee to either make recommendations for changes, for, implementing new ones or keeping what we have. And so I just wanted to have a resource that, was easy to just pull up and reference for us in this capacity.
And
And go ahead, Jen.
there are specific recommendations in the plan that talk about
Right.
evaluating funding mechanisms for the housing trust fund, and that's modifying the inclusionary zoning requirements. So right now we have 10%. It says talking about making them at 12%. So the Planning and Zoning Commission will be looking at this through their regulatory review committee, but it'll be good to have that committee to kind of as another set of eyes and ears, I think.
Well, and I don't
Yeah.
think we thought of the 12% until it came from SLR, and that made sense. And so as this committee is going along, and if they see other things, they can then pass those along as well.
And I think Jen and I talked about another amendment today, just based on the work that we've been doing, because we are a predominantly student community, and SLR, actually, I'd asked them, I said, how do you determine eligibility of students for affordable housing? And so they passed along two different sets of rules depending on which federal program you use. Interestingly, when I went to the state, they don't require that. And quite frankly, the answer I got would make just about any student eligible, regardless of the income of their parents. Because the only income that would be counted under the state's guidelines currently is the income of the student themselves. So if they had an internship and then any money the parents paid towards rent. So we've already told, quite frankly, I had the discussion with Capstone before that project ended, that we were going to be looking for, as a condition, that the affordability of students be determined using the low income housing tax credit guidelines, which are very specific as to how students qualify, so that you don't have students whose parents make, $500,000 qualifying for an affordable unit simply because they don't have a job.
Charlie?
Well, I mean, are we targeting the transient population or the permanent population?
We're targeting the people who need affordable units and who truly need affordable units based on their income. I think, I think we'd like to see a mix of ownership and rental, and hopefully you're getting, more of both, but there may be some transient that come in. It really depends on what they're looking for. There may be some graduate student families that would qualify because they're not dependent on anyone. So that might be more of your transient population.
And that's where I think that we can maybe work something out with, and I don't know if this, how this would work or if it's even allowed, but if UConn has funding and we have the ability to put this in place, so that, we want people who work at UConn, we want graduate families, we want people who work in other parts of the community to all be able to live in the community. Maybe they can be a partner with us and provide some of that funding, that they seem to have a lot of. Well, they got more than us. They have
Like,
the state. So
don't forget to get it from us.
so and so I think we have a good path going forward in terms of our next meeting, in looking at the draft language for the committee and looking at the draft language for the ordinance. And with that, we have our 2021 regular meeting schedule. Is this up for a vote, Jennifer, or is
No, I just use it as a reminder so that you would mark your calendars for October, November, and December.
if needed for all those?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Great. Anything else that I'm missing?
I think you're good.
All right, so I think the next item on the agenda is a motion for adjournment.
I move.
Sarah seconds.
Second.
And all in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Great.
Have a good night, all.
Great.
Good work,
Bye.
good work, everyone.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Good
Good
work.
night.